Welcome to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. Like any good marriage, we will debate, evaluate, and sometimes quarrel about how privacy and security impact business in the 21st century.
Hi, Jody Daniels here. I'm the founder and CEO of Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and certified informational privacy professional, providing practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
Hello, I am Justin Daniels. I'm a shareholder and corporate M&A and tech transaction lawyer at the law firm Baker Donaldson, advising companies in the deployment and scaling of technology. Since data is critical to every transaction, I help clients make informed business decisions while managing data privacy and cybersecurity risk. And when needed, I lead the legal cyber data breach response brigade.
And this episode is brought to you by Clover Advisors. We help companies to comply with data privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, e-commerce, professional services, and digital media. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there's greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more and to check out our best-selling book, Data Reimagined, Building Trust One Bite at a Time, visit redcloveradvisors.com. Well, this is fun. We're recording a podcast where I can still see snow on my deck.
Right.
In Atlanta.
Aren't we heading into what? Is this year 5 of podcasting?
Well, from a year perspective, but if you counted, it's like 4 years and a quarter, says the former CPA.
Okay. You sure it's out to the right amount of decimal points?
I was actually at dinner and someone was talking about what conversation we should talk about. They were trying to come up with conversation starters, and someone suggested we could talk about pi and how many decimals are in, like which decimal they wanted to go out to and talk about those numbers. So see, some people really want to do that.
Maybe that's when you needed your AI avatar to have that conversation on your behalf.
All right. We did not talk about that, but let's get back to privacy and security fun. Today, we have Aaron Painter, who is a deepfake expert. I cannot speak properly today.
I can't wait to ask him about his deepfake expertise. We're going to have to delve into that.
All right. Aaron is the CEO of Nametag, Inc., an identity verification company that is at the forefront of stopping social engineering attacks at the employee IT help desk. And in case anyone was wondering, no, I'm not going to edit out my fun over here. That is what makes our podcast fun and real. So Aaron, the deepfake expert, we are so glad that you are here with us today.
Thank you. I'm excited to have fun with both of you. I feel like I have joined your dinner table conversation, and hopefully we're going to have some really good topics to cover.
I think we are.
So, Aaron, would you like to discuss with us your career journey to date and include anything about deepfake that you might have to share with our audience?
This is definitely the first. Feet have not often been a topic of conversation on podcasts. Coincidentally, though, in the world of Gen AI, feet and hands are sometimes the things that are a little bit difficult for the computational power to put together. So maybe you're onto something. My background, it was heavily in tech. I spent 14 years at Microsoft. I started in product in Redmond, in Seattle, Microsoft headquarters. I was the first product manager for Office as we brought together the individual apps of Word and PowerPoint and Excel into the system, as we called it then, and now 365. And the rest of my career at Microsoft was outside the US. I ran elements of international expansion, opening Microsoft in 31 new countries, ran the Windows franchise on the ground in Brazil for a few years, and then ultimately ran Microsoft China for 5.5 years, based 2 years in Hong Kong, 3.5 in Beijing. So a lot of my career experiences were getting a lens of how people were using technology in enterprises as it was, cloud technologies were booming, productivity tools were coming on the market. In new economies that were trying to think about new ways to solve problems. I loved it. I left. I wrote a book. I then I was hired by a private equity firm to sort of run a company that was based in the UK, focused on cloud migrations and helping large enterprises move to the cloud. I lived in London at a time that was just super exciting, but it was a ton of travel. And I decided just before the pandemic to move back to the US. And I sort of moved to Seattle about a month before the pandemic started and thought, "Oh, okay, great, I'll just settle here for a little bit," and ended up spending quite a bit of time there. And it was sort of in that experience of sort of pandemic landing and starting that I realized in the market there were challenges around identity verification due to some really personal experiences, and that's eventually what led to starting Nametag almost 5 years ago.
Aaron, identity verification is a really big challenge to companies, and it's also an area of vulnerability, and they're not really aware of all the different issues that exist today. So you were just sharing a little bit, maybe there was a personal story. Can you share a little bit more about the issues that are here today and what companies need to be mindful of?
Yeah, for me, there was something, and I had an experience that probably many of us have had, which is sadly for reasons I had a lot of friends and family who had had their identity stolen at the start of the pandemic. And they were, didn't know why, all of a sudden their accounts were taken over and they were getting these emails, you spent this money and you authorized this and that. And I said, oh my gosh, feels like the world is falling apart in so many ways, but we're going to fix this. Together, we're going to jump on the phone. I'm going to be a good friend. I'm going to be a good son. We're going to call these companies. We're going to sort this stuff out. And every time we called a company, they would ask us these sort of silly questions. And we all know them. We've been through them, these sort of security questions. What's your favorite color? What street did you live on in X year? What's your last four of your social? And it turned out that someone had found the answers to those questions and was able to answer them when they called before us to sort of do damage on the account. And so I said, how is it in this modern era that we don't actually know who's behind the screen, that we don't have a way to verify who someone is? And different ways to do kind of identity verification. Turns out it's a very large category. Social security questions are one. Social security numbers are sometimes another. Different ways we have passwords or usernames or PIN codes. And then it turns out there had been this market that's existed for quite some time around when you open a new bank account, there's a process called KYC, right? Know your customer, typically for anti-money laundering requirements, where the bank is required or the financial institution is required to plausibly have check the identity of who someone is. Typically, that's done with the driver's license or passport. And so there's technology that had developed to be able to do that experience of, hey, take a photo of your ID, take a photo of yourself, and we can do that remotely. But the technology that had existed for these had always been in web browsers. Turned out everyone on the market does this in a web browser, maybe on your mobile phone, but still in a web browser. And that technology meant it was good enough for regulatory compliance, kind of check the box, but it wasn't good enough for security. And that's one of the key reasons we found that people, when you called that tech support or you called customer support, they weren't asking you to scan your ID and take a selfie because that infrastructure, the bank had you do that to open the account. But when you want to call and do a transfer, they ask you the security question because the process that was built for KYC simply wasn't built for security. And that's what led us to try and find it. Is there a better way? Is there another way this can be solved?
That's so interesting. I do hate those questions. I hate them every time. They're so basic. And I think there has to be a better way.
Well, until there is, you should actually answer them dishonestly so that people can't find out the information. But the problem with that is, where do you store all of these answers? So it's like you solve one problem, but then you potentially create another. But, Aaron, one of the things I wanted to chat a little bit about was some of the things that we're seeing now. Deepfakes, where you could have your public company CEO saying things that moves the stock price that are completely false. Authenticating the identity of people when, hey, Aaron, I got to send you a wire. Okay, we'll jump on a Zoom call, and everybody on the Zoom call, except for me, is fake. We've seen that in Hong Kong. And so just, give our audience a taste for some of the real challenging issues that companies are grappling with now when it comes to identity verification and, how your company helps to try to solve this problem.
Yeah, let's start with medical education, because I know that you do such a great job in this podcast, usually of educating kind of listeners on new tech and issues. And let's start with deepfakes. So the term itself typically emerged in 2017, 2018 by a user on Reddit who was basically referring to adult content that was created using celebrity lookalikes. So the face of a celebrity, mix things around, and you had sort of a fake piece of multimedia content that was simulating the likeness of someone else. And that term has really run wild. And it's run wild, particularly in the last couple of years, as we've seen the rise of these AI tools. Because Gen AI has made it easier to create these deep fakes that can then be used in a whole bunch of different aspects of society. One really big category is the announcements, content. Was this a video of the CEO? Was this a video of this politician saying or doing, impersonating someone else, the likeliness of someone else doing or saying something? One big category. The other big category is people using deepfakes to impersonate someone for security purposes. And that's usually meant taking over someone's account or, we'll talk about how it's happened and when, but typically pretending that you are the rightful account owner. And for whatever reason, you are locked out of your account. Let's say you've added multi-factor authentication protect your work account or your bank account, or you name it. You upgraded your phone, you've lost your phone, it's simply not working, whatever it might be. As strong as that security is, the weakness is simply calling and saying you're locked out. Because if you call and say you're locked out of that, it's left the hardworking person at the help desk to try and assess if you are the person who is the account owner. And so deepfakes are being used in sort of both of those categories. The way a deepfake works typically is there is software that allows you to create some sort of variation using Gen AI tools. A lot of it is extremely accessible, easy, and quite high quality today. And you can create video deepfakes, you can create voice deepfakes, you can create still image deepfakes. All of it is gotten to the point where in the category of voice, for example, 5-7 years ago, if you read a specific script for 20 minutes, you could train a piece of software on what your voice might be like using certain words and a lot of input. Microsoft researchers have now proven with 3 seconds of someone's audio, right, you can recreate a voice deepfake of that person. And it might not be super high fidelity, but sometimes super high fidelity isn't what's necessary to fool someone. And so there are different types of deepfakes. The way they then are deployed, no matter how you create them, in a digital context, you're sort of it's equivalent of flashing, holding up the fake that you've made. There are two types of ways that they're often used in a virtual process. One is what's called an injection attack. And an injection attack, the easiest way to think about it might be on Zoom. The ability on Zoom to select a camera or microphone. It is as easy to select a piece of software that, let's say, is creating a real-time deepfake, something called an emulator, something that is projecting, you are behind the camera, but this software is changing what you look like to look like someone else. And you've simply selected the different camera on Zoom, and that piece of software is projecting the deepfake image instead of projecting you into the video call. That's the concept of an injection attack, and it's something that's gotten very real. The other concept is what's called a presentation attack. And that's simply when you hold up, let's say, a photo or a video, or you hold up your phone that's playing a video or showing a photo to the webcam, right? Or you're Mission Impossible style wearing a mask. You're trying to trick the system by presenting what is otherwise doctored or fake information. Those are the two ways that people use or deploy a deepfake. So it's interesting and important to understand how they're used, but also then how they're created, voice, video, et cetera, and then how they're deployed or put into harm. And those are the two common ways.
Okay, well, that was really scary.
Well, I think we haven't gotten to the really scary part, which is what do we do to mitigate the impact and effect of these things?
Well, yes, that is the next part that we should be talking about. So what is it that maybe we should start with what companies are doing today? You shared a little bit with that know your customer experience. Not everyone is doing that. They're doing the password version. So maybe, Aaron, if you can share a little bit about where we are today and really where we should be going.
Yeah, it's so much of what we've seen happen in the last 18 months is rooted from this particular attack at MGM. And poor MGM, and then they're just becoming the poster child of this, but there could have been many others. It got so big that 60 Minutes has done an episode on this. I mean, it's that kind of mainstream at this point. And an employee, a bad actor called MGM, pretending to be an employee, and said, I'm locked out of my employee work account. My multi-factor authentication isn't working. The help desk rep did their best, had some questions, went through a process. Roughly 8 minutes later, they reset access to that account, giving the bad actor access to that employee account. That bad actor then went in and using that employee's credential, impersonating them, essentially, and caused a bunch of harm, deposited ransomware, and took MGM kind of offline for 2 weeks. And this started sort of an epidemic of these attacks over the last 18 months. where hundreds and hundreds of companies of all sizes and some of the very largest that we interact with on a daily basis have experienced this type of attack because it is fortunately very easy to do. It is a human vulnerability, not necessarily a technological one. And so in light of this attack, a leading security company, Okta, that actually helped protect MGM in MGM's case, their CISO came out and said, the advice we recommend is that when a user is locked out of their account, you should do some form of what they call visual verification. And visual verification can mean, let's see the person who is claiming to be locked out in person, come into the office, come into the branch, or, maybe they're a remote worker or they're remote. And so you could do something, a video call. You could have a team call or Zoom call with them and sort of have them move, maybe have them hold up their ID, maybe you ask them questions, you interview them a bit and do this visual verification before you proceed with letting that person reset the account. It seemed like good advice. The challenge that happened was that these platforms like Teams and Zoom and others weren't really meant to prevent against people using deepfakes. They weren't built to prevent against injection attacks and selecting a different camera microphone. That's a feature, right? That makes Teams and Zoom wonderful. But suddenly you could use that feature to cause harm. And so we then saw this very notable example, right, of the large financial services firm. We initially learned a little bit more nuanced, but it was someone purporting to be a CFO based in London, a controller based in Hong Kong. The CFO said, controller, I need you to do a few wire transfers for me. The controller was slightly suspicious. The CFO said, well, a bunch of the leadership team were on a video call now. Here's the link. Why don't you join? The controller joined the call. And they recognized the faces, the voices of members of the leadership, but they were deepfakes. They were deepfake emulators being used in that video call. And so the controller rightfully thought this was a legitimate thing. Of course, everyone agreed with it. They went off and processed the 25 million wire transfers. And it turns out that was a deepfake in a video call. And so that sort of scared the whole industry because we're like, oh my goodness, the solution we thought we could rely on, suddenly we can't really rely on. And so that's led to this crisis of confidence now, and people saying, again, how do we remotely know who's behind a screen? Can we trust that person? And that really has become kind of the scary thing.
So Aaron, tell us a little bit about Nametag and your approach to helping solve this problem.
We took an approach that said there's value in trusting a credential issued by government, like a driver's license or a passport. We've all seen that in the real world, in the in-person world. But the issue we identified was that the weakness was how that information is captured and collected, meaning it's in a web browser. And so if you take the same experience and you move it exclusively to mobile phones and ask a user to use their mobile phone to scan their ID and to take a selfie, you could get a wildly different level of security assurance in that experience. And so we created identity verification technology, works only on phones, and in a really novel way and how it appears on your phone, but it takes advantage of the security features native in the mobile phone, namely the what's called the secure enclave, the cryptography element that makes a phone secure. Takes advantage of things like the three-dimensional Face ID camera, not for Face ID, but to use it to take a selfie of a person. So you get a three-dimensional selfie, for example, of that person. Things that give you altogether a much higher level of assurance. So you could do this form of identity verification in a remote way. And we started with this and we said, all right, we have this really novel way of doing it. Wow, gosh, there's, like you mentioned the mission over Red Clover, that there's a sense of crisis of trust. You don't know who you can trust. We can really solve that on social media platforms and other things. And then we got pulled by the market to say, yeah, that's all nice, but I have a very specific problem. I have users who are calling my help desk and claiming to be locked out. Can you solve that? And so we started working with some large enterprises to say, hey, let's give your help desk agents a tool they can use instead of asking security questions to send a verification link that can send back sort of a high assurance outcome on who the person is behind the screen. That worked really well. And then they said, hey, by the way, half of our support desk calls, coincidentally, are people who are locked out. Wouldn't it be better if they didn't have to call the help desk? And so we created a self-service way, first for employees and then eventually for customers, to be able to reset themselves when they're locked out of MFA. There was a long time there was sort of a forgot my password button on a web page, but when you added MFA, that button went away. And so being locked out of MFA meant you had to call the help desk. And we brought back a self-service way for people to do that in a high assurance way, such that you didn't have to call the help desk. And for us as a company, that really became kind of our turning point moment. And now, we're seeing these other use cases that companies we work with are bringing us to say, oh, can I also use it here or there? But that self-service MFA functionality and equipping help desks has really become our bread and butter use case of the the IDV that we do.
I know a particular large company that I will remain nameless. I had MFA on it and their MFA broke and it wouldn't work. And I just went in a circle. I could reset the password, but I couldn't get through in the account. It is such a large company that there is no human to talk to. And I basically had to shut the whole account down. This sounds like lovely technology. I could avoid that huge hassle. But at the same time, Aaron, I really like how you're listening to your customers and hearing the real world problems that you're seeing to be able to tackle them. I think that's incredibly smart and can only imagine what new problems we're going to run into next.
It's funny you say that because I view Aaron's story a little differently.
Of course you do. That's why I'm the privacy person. You're the security
He said,
person.
she said.
No, that's why you're she said and I'm he said.
Well, there's that too.
What Aaron said. I guess, Aaron, what I found interesting about your story is you have a company, you think you have a problem that you're trying to solve, and it might make sense, but it may not be the biggest pain point that your prospective customer is trying to solve. And they're like, well, that's interesting, but this is really what my problem. It's almost as if your customers helped you do the product development for you and just say, hey, can you help solve this? And you're like, well, we do this, but if you want us to solve this, okay, we'll do that.
100%. It is fully everything that we have found commercial traction in, and humbly, it's become very significant commercial traction, has been because we've listened to our customers on what to go build. And the fun part is, I mean, I'm traveling today. We're doing a kind of a product summit with the team, and we're getting so much great feedback in all the other areas where identity verification is causing this absence of trust. And so this, oh, can I use it here? Can I use it there? And we're using that input and that feedback to say, hey, let's co-create it together. Let's go build, other out of the box ways for you to be able to use it in new scenarios. Use identity verification to stop fraud in other places. And so it's for us, it's privacy is a whole thing we can talk about, but there is an element of doing the right thing and doing good and protecting people's accounts. And fundamentally, if our accounts are where so much of our data lives, protecting people's accounts, we feel also is a fundamental way of protecting their privacy, let alone the way that we actually go through our process alone as being privacy preserving.
So one of the things you remarked about was how you're using 3D camera for my face, but you also talked about using a passport or a driver's license, which, that can be potentially fraudulently manipulated. So my question is, what do you see the vision in terms of going forward of people continuing to use passports or driver's license? Do you think we're going to have a situation here where it'll be some kind of digital token or something else that you'll then pivot towards to using that for the identity verification?
Yeah, I think we found some remarkably unique ways to be able to trust the documents that are issued today. And that was kind of an important criteria because there are often interesting initiatives. There were for a while in crypto with decentralized identity, and there are some states, for example, in the US, doing digital identity program. All that's super interesting, and we follow that extremely closely and work with many of them. The challenge, though, is that you need an element of universality. You can't have, you can't call that customer support line and then send you a link and it only work with Android or only work with iOS or only work if you have the decentralized crypto credential. It's got to work with something that people have. And so we had to find a way to use modern technologies to work with that thing that many people have in their pocket. So for us, the underlying technology, we, sort of catchy, what we call a deepfake defense. And deepfake defense has a few components. One is using the cryptography in the device. And turns out the ability to prevent injection attacks is now very useful for deepfakes. But prior to that, you're right, many people do make fake ID documents. But the main way they made them was digital. They would modify, let's say, a PDF of a passport. And then in KYC tools, there's literally an upload PDF button. So if you have made a doctored PDF, you save the PDF and you literally just upload your fake thing and you're all set. And so 80-90% of the way people make fake documents is actually just on screen. When you get to the next level of, hey, I'm going to make a physical fake and I'm going to print those out or in a really high fidelity way, that exists. But then we analyze that, we get to look at a whole bunch of advanced data from that phone. The three-dimensional space, we call it adaptive document verification, but we're getting a lot of data and very high fidelity photos when we're looking at those images, right? So someone has an injected, manipulated PDF, We're getting very high fidelity on the document itself. And then we get these really advanced selfies like you might get if the person was in person. So that's kind of how we use technology to solve it. There are programs that are super cool. I mean, India is kind of a role model. India has a nationwide digital identity program that is a gold standard in many emerging markets around the world called Otter. We have some really, really cool integrations with Otter because we're able to trust what the government sends us digitally from that user. But unfortunately, again, that's universal, mostly in India, but not globally.
Well, I wish I had a brunette wig because I'm going to put on my Jody hat.
Oh.
Maybe I'll have to have that at some point this year. That would be fun.
I can only imagine.
But I guess, Aaron, I wanted to ask you a follow-up. And like I said, I'm going into Jody's part about privacy. So in order for you to do your verification, you're collecting a driver's license, which has some highly sensitive personal information on that driver's license. So I guess that means you have to have a pretty robust privacy program, or are there ways that you sandbox or otherwise minimize what you need that driver's license to do?
Yeah, there are many elements of privacy, and it's, I think I was joking before we went on, because I was telling some of my colleagues I was coming to chat with you both, and they were so excited because like, all we think about is privacy and security. This is the intersection of what we do every day, and privacy for us is a fundamentally important concept. And it's both fundamental for the end user themselves as they're going through that process. How can they trust? How can they explicitly consent? How can they self-revoke? We are not an opt-out model. We are a proactive opt-in model. But one of the practical examples might be, when you go to a bar and there's a bouncer at the door, and they're in the US, they need to be over 21, right? And they're trying to verify, are you over 21? They don't need your home address. They don't even need your name, right? But yet we give them all the information at once. It turns out they might look at it. They also often increasingly scan it. A whole other story on where all that data goes and how it's used. But it's way more than they need. That is oversharing. And so one of the fundamental constructs that we had from day one, we called privacy masking, which is this ability to limit, even though you've scanned your ID because we were checking to make sure it is valid, it doesn't mean that you need to share all that information, let's say, with the company. In fact, you can share very limited elements of it. And in some cases, the company would ask for any of it. And so that's a core element for the end user, multiple layers of consent. They get this shit, they want to do this. They get to consent to specifically what they're sharing with a specific company and for how long. Privacy is critical there. It turns out, though, as we entered the workforce space very, very fully, we learned that part of what it meant to be workforce grade was that enterprises have a whole bunch of different privacy requirements and a spectrum of choices they often want to make as a company. And so we offer an enormous amount of granularity and who holds the data, where does the data live, how long do you hold the data, is the employer governing it for the employee, or is the employee governing it for themselves? All these bits of nuances. We have defaults that are sort of industry best practices, but we like to give enterprises the ability to adjust those what's best for their demographic or user base.
Aaron, with everything that you know, I can only imagine your cocktail party conversations and people maybe asking, well, what can I do to protect myself? So what is your best personal privacy tip?
I take advantage of knowing that there is a trust deficit with many companies today. And so if most companies don't know who the person is behind the account, right, even in good scenarios, like I'm locked out and I want to get back in, they don't know who I am. And so one of the things I do is I don't necessarily trust that my username or my email address or the name on that account should really be who I am. So if you think in the olden days, you might have made a restaurant reservation and you'd give a different name, maybe in case you didn't show up or because you wanted to be anonymous. I take that to an extreme personally. So I use different names or not my name on many, many accounts, my ride shares, anywhere where I know the system isn't going to actually ask for who I really am. Maybe they don't need to know who I really am because I don't necessarily trust them with that data or the connections they're going to make based on that. And so in a very practical sense, something I do a lot of is kind of using alternative names in many aspects of my personal life.
I've had many others say the same.
Indeed. So, Aaron, when you're not helping people and protecting their security and their privacy, what do you like to do for fun?
I startup life initially, and now kind of scaling company life is pretty consuming for me. So I love that. But I also really love travel, and traveling and living and working in different parts of the world has been a big just part of who I am and my personality for as long as I can remember. So I'm very frequently in new places, new countries, exploring new sort of cultures and ways of doing business. It's one of the things I love most of doing at Microsoft, and just a big part of my life.
Is there a big next destination or maybe a few destinations that are on your horizon?
I do less frequently traveled places. I had a goal, which is kind of crazy, to visit 100 countries earlier in my life, and I kind of passed that, and then I sort of stopped counting, and so that became really interesting. I'm very interested in some parts of Eastern Europe, so it's sort of between west, like the Stans. Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, for example, I'm fascinated with. Starting to look at a trip to Uzbekistan in particular now. I've only been to, I don't know, 25% of Africa. Like, there are many more places in Africa to go visit. Those are the kind of things that just I love exploring.
Well, thank you for sharing. We look forward to maybe seeing some pictures of some of your favorite places. Where could people go to learn more?
LinkedIn's great. It's probably my most frequent platform. I post a lot of content. As a company, we try and post a lot of relevant content, just educate, keep people current on what we're learning in the market, what we're seeing. And it's a great place to engage. And I love feedback. So when you're finishing your commute or lawn mowing or chores around the house and you get back to your computer, I'd love if you reached out.
Amazing. Well, Aaron, thank you so much for coming and sharing. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Ton of fun.
Thanks for listening to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and check us out on LinkedIn. See you next time.